Welcome to the Poetry Moment, featuring Jane Hirshfield's poem Like an Ant Carrying Her Bits of Leaf and Sand. I'm Sean Sebastian Nahr. Behind Jane Hirshfield's house, the poet tends her stone-walled garden. Images from her garden of apricot trees and figs, of rosemary bushes, and yes, ants show up in her poems. Roses, oak trees, daffodils, these all seem appropriate topics for poetry. But ants? Many poets would think they were insignificant. Not Hirshfield. Hirshfield explained in an interview, perhaps one of poetry's tasks, beginning with the Romantics, has been to bring more and more burnish of attention to more and more of what used to be taken for granted. Take nothing for granted, she says. Pay attention to the large and the small, and pay attention to both love and terror. Bring them together in a poem. In an interview with the Paris Review, Hirshfield said poems sustain the complexity, multiplicity, and peculiarities of lives, not their erasure. They carry the sense of wholeness and unblind us to connection. These allegiances are currently desperately needed. An ant's nest comes into a poem and reminds that what may seem small, noticing it, wanting its continuance on this perishable and fragile planet is what matters most. No part of existence is discardable. In her career, which truly took off after an adult education poetry writing course in 1981, Hirshfield has garnered honors such as being elected a Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and winning the Donald Hall Jane Kenyon Prize in American Poetry. A student and translator of the poetry from the women in the ancient courts of Japan and the master haiku writer Basho. Hirshfield is also a Zen Buddhist who worked as a cook. She cooks, she gardens, she rides Arabian horses, but her main passion is poetry. The New York Times calls her poetry radiant and passionate. This poem, about looking at an ant carrying her bits, is also about writing poetry. The poet is put in the same camp as an ant, each with their mystifying logic to where the bits of leaf and word should be placed. And the last words that Hirshfield places about the poem carrying love or terror, or it carries nothing, speak to the power of those small constructions that we call poems. In the full interview on Howard County Poetry and Literature Society's talk show, The Writing Life, Hirshfield says about this poem, "For me, one of the roles of poetry in my life, why it has been necessary for me, is because it instructs me in the possibilities of fully agreeing to a 360-degree life. We all would like things to be easy, to only know love and never know loss, to only know increase and never know the lessening of our strengths and our powers and our world. But as this poem says, everything will be taken from us, everything. My task as a human being is to embrace not just the easily affirmed, but also the thing which we want to push away. And rather than to blind myself to it or to find some easy agreement, what I hunger for is in fact to say yes to the most difficult things that life is going to give me. Poetry lets me do that. It shows me a way to do it." And now, Jane Hirshfield's poem, Like an Ant Carrying Her Bits of Leaf or Sand.
Like an ant carrying her bits of leaf or sand. Like an ant carrying her bits of leaf or sand, the poem carries its words, moving one, then another into place. Something in an ant is sure where these morsels belong, but the ant could not explain this. Something in a poem is certain where its words belong, but the poet could not explain this. All day the ant obeys an inexplicable order. All day the poet obeys an incomprehensible demand. The world changes or does not change by these labors. The geode peeled open gives off its cold scent or does not. But that is no concern of the ants, of the poems. The work of existence devours its own unfolding. What dissolves will dissolve. You, reader, and I, and all our quick angers and longings, the potato's sugary hunger for growing larger, the unblinking heat of the tiger. No thimble of cloud or stone that will not vanish, and still the rearrangements continue. The ant's work belongs to the ant. The poem carries love and terror, or it carries nothing.